You're listening to the Be So Good podcast with Colin Pearce. Colin says you are 10 times better than you think. So why not be so good they can't ignore you? Here he is, Colin Pearce.
Hey there, you've probably met someone who's meandering through life, half-baked, cold fish, going nowhere. You shake your head when you see it, and if they're close to you, you wish they'd get a good old wake-up to who they could be. If only someone would impress on them that they're 10 times better than they think. If only someone would motivate them to be so good they'd get noticed. Well, that's the story of today's guest. His life changed when he heard one line on a tape recording in another room. You never know what's going to click someone's light on, and you can only hope and pray it comes in the nick of time, like it did for our guest today. I invited Jim Cathcart to tell his story. Now, I've known Jim and his wife Paula for over 30 years. We've eaten out together here in the Adelaide Hills at the German township of Hahndorf. That's near where Paula cuddled her first koala. We've also eaten and gone out together as a family in beautiful Jolla California, where they lived until recently when they moved to Austin, Texas. Jim was a college dropout. He was a heavy smoker and overweight in a dead-end job. He's going to tell us what woke him up. Today, Jim's the author of 20 books, including the international bestseller The Acorn Principle. His TEDx talk has attracted 2.5 million views, by the way, and that's put it in the top 1% of all time. He was inducted into the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame and has delivered over 3,100 professional speeches all over his native USA, as well as Australia and a plethora of other countries. In 2019, he gave dozens of presentations in China. That was before COVID-19, of course, which put the kibosh on everybody's travel arrangements. So now he speaks online and serves on the boards of multiple companies. He has a full life as a rock and roll guitarist and a singer, performing in nightclubs and at conventions. He rides his big fat motorcycle, he's a pistol shooter, and he hikes. Meet Jim Cathcart.
Good day, Australia. Nice to see you, everyone. And thanks, Colin, for inviting me to be a part of this show.
Well, it's a great privilege, Jim. Miss Paula, is she okay? And Jim Jr.?
Yep. Jim Jr. is now approaching 50 years old.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Director of Human Resources for a major luxury hotel chain. We've been 23 years with them. He has 2 children. And he's the kind of person I want to grow up to be. And his kids are wonderful. So evidently all these things you and I have been teaching all these years actually works in practice if you apply it at home.
Well, when we talk about grandchildren, and we have recently added number 7, which is fantastic fun. The thing that Zig Ziglar always said, and I've said it often on this podcast to other people, see, he used to say, if I'd have known my grandbubbies are going to be so fine, I would have been kinder to the parents.
Yep. That's like that old line, I've forgotten who said it, but they said, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself.
Well, you're still taking better care of yourself. You're out running on the trails. I see you doing that with a few local mates. What do you do?
Well, we just moved from California to Texas, so the answer is different now than it was a few months ago. But for 37 years, we lived in California, and the last 18 of those 37, we lived in Thousand Oaks, which is just over the hill from Malibu, which is a famous location, Hollywood location, and right in the Santa Monica Mountains. So every Wednesday, every Friday, and every Sunday at sunrise, I would meet my friends in a group we called the Heartbreak Hiking Fools, because we had a bad trail called Heartbreak, and that was our signature trail. And we would hike for 1 hour to the top of a mountain and then catch our breath and then turn around and stroll back to the car. And the stroll, of course, is up and down over many mountains. And then we'd go to breakfast and have coffee and tell lies and things like that. But it kept me fit all those years. And now then I'm doing an assortment of things here in Austin, Texas. But staying fit has been a joy for me, not just a job.
And there are no mountains in Austin, Texas. So you've got to
No
walk flat.
mountains at all.
Is that
We
why
live
you
in the
moved?
hill country, and there are some hills, but no mountains.
No. And you realize, of course, well, you do, but everybody else doesn't, that Austin, Texas is a sister city to the city of Adelaide, where I live. So we're brothers and sisters now, Jim.
I love that.
Yes.
That's actually, I didn't remember that. That's excellent. Thank you for telling me that.
Well, I want to know how a bloke gets to be in the top 1% of TEDx people, how he gets to be Speakers Hall of Famer, and how he gets to be a guitarist, a rock singer, or whatever. So why don't we start with the whole Jim Cathcart story, the whole kit and caboodle? Could you tell us where you began and where you lived and what you did for school so that prepared you for the rest of the career you're going to have?
You bet. I went to public school. I graduated high school number 176 out of 430 students. So I was not an excellent student. I went to college. I went to the state college that accepted 97% of applicants. So I just squeaked in, and I went there for a year and a half, and then I dropped out. And I worked in warehouses and unloaded trucks and boxcars and worked as a bill collector. Then I went back to another university, Little Rock, Arkansas, University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and attended school there for about a year and a half, and then dropped out and never went back. So I have just under 3 years of college education. But since I've grown my career, I've employed many people who had PhDs and other kind of advanced education and had much greater minds than me. And I've managed to achieve goals that I never dreamed I would be able to achieve. And I've become extremely, or extensively, I guess is a better word, educated in my field, which is the field of human development, applied behavioral science, not college education, but a great deal of clinical education, practical education, and courses of every stripe that you can imagine, plus hundreds of hours of sitting with highly intelligent people and researching and exploring subjects. I owned a psychological research firm for a couple of years, but let me put that in place and then rewind back to the beginning of my answer. I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, in the southern central part of the USA. And my dad was a telephone repairman. My mom was a housewife taking care of me and my little sister and my invalid grandfather who had been disabled by a stroke, and his wife, my grandmother. And dad traveled on the road as a telephone lineman at first and then as a repairman. So my sister and I grew up expecting to have a normal life. We were taught to be nice people, but we weren't encouraged to dream big dreams or aspire to great achievements. And so my life reflected that mindset until 1972, when I was newly married, 50 pounds overweight. I don't know how many stone that is.
What? 50 pounds? That's divided by 4. That's nearly 4 stone.
Ew.
Overweight. Wow.
I was fat.
When I told my son-in-law that I had lost 10 kilograms, he was only just courting my daughter. He said, "Well, you must have been a fatty bumbar before you started."
Well, I sort of was. I was strong, but I was not fit. And I was fat, of course. And I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And I was newly married, 1972, newly married with a baby at home and no money in the bank. I didn't know anybody that had money. And I didn't have any connections that could open doors for me. And I didn't have a college degree. So 1972, I'm working as a clerk at the Urban Renewal Agency in Little Rock, Arkansas, for $525 a month. And my wife's a part-time secretary and takes care of our son. And so that's all the income we've got. And one day I was sitting in my office bored because I was an assistant to a man who was not busy. His name was Bob Moore. And he didn't need an assistant, but I was in that position. So if he ever had needed me, I would have stepped right up and said, yes, sir. But I didn't. So I was sitting there, and in the next room, the radio was playing, and it played the voice of Earl Nightingale, who was known at the time as the Dean of Personal Motivation. He was on 900 radio stations all over the world. So I'm sitting there at the Housing Authority Board, and I hear his voice. And he said, if you will spend 1 extra hour each day studying your chosen field, in 5 years or less, you'll be a leading expert in that field. Colin, that hit me like an oncoming train. I said, wait a minute, hour a day. I've got 8 hours a day. I'm a government employee. I could do this probably by next Thursday, an hour a day. At 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, 5 years, that's 1,250 hours. Yeah, that would make anybody a leading expert on a subject. So what do I want to do? I don't want a career in urban renewal. And I thought about it for a few weeks, and then it hit me. I want to do what he does. What's that? I don't know. I just knew it felt right. I wanted to be like Earl Nightingale. So I started studying the field, new at the time, unknown prior to that, of human behavior that was called the Human Potential Movement. Years later, they named it that in retrospect. So I started studying that, and I read all the classic books, and I'll show you some of those.
This is amazing because you were in no position. I can't compare the two of you, the Jim Cathcart who heard Earl Nightingale and the
Yep.
Jim Cathcart who's been such a huge influencer over the last 45 years.
Thank you.
50
Well, I read
years.
The Power of Positive Thinking. This is an old original version.
Wow.
How to Be a Genius by Wallace Wattles, who wrote Science of Getting Rich. See You at the Top by Zig Ziglar. I read that later after I met Zig and got to know him. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Psycho-Cybernetics. It's a newer book. The Magic of Thinking Big, The Way of Chuang Tzu, and
What was the last one?
of course,
The last
Think
one
and
again?
Grow Rich. The Way of Chuang Tzu, Thomas Merton,
Yep.
Magic of Thinking Big, and the biggie, this guy. First edition, Think and Grow Rich, 1930 something.
Wow.
And that was my primer. You know, that was first year of school, basically.
My first book in all of that category wasn't one of those. It was Frank Bettger's book,
Oh yeah,
How to Go from Failure to Success in Selling. But then the others
That's right.
fell on after that. These are old books, but my goodness, they're good.
I know. Well, Frank Bettger, he inspired Pete Rose, who was one of the famous baseball players in the USA. And Pete Rose was called Charlie Hustle because he took Frank Bettger's idea of raising yourself from failure to success. And he just went the extra mile on everything. And then Frank Bettger, when he became very old, was unable to earn money anymore and didn't have enough in savings. And so the National Speakers Association in the USA, to which I belonged at that time, this was around 1979, we formed a foundation called the Professional Speakers Benefit Fund for people who had outlived their assets and were needy. And Frank Bettger was the first recipient of funds from that foundation. Isn't that something?
Isn't that something? That is amazing.
It is.
A lovely story.
Yeah. So I started studying all these books and listening to recordings of Earl Nightingale, and I became fanatical about it. I mean, textbook fanatical, not just a fan, but someone who was obsessed with the idea of personal development, goal setting, interpersonal communication, leadership, time management, thinking, strategic thinking and things like that. That's all I wanted to be around. And so my circle of friends evolved. The old friends said, gee, here he comes again. Mr. Motivation. And new friends said, hey, have you read this? No. And so, we'd start collaborating and the growth would just multiply. And I got promoted on the job again and again. And then I went into business selling training materials.
Now I wanted to ask let me ask how you put that stuff into practice in the housing commission kind of job you're in.
That was almost just an organic evolution because I had learned to set goals. I had learned to communicate better. I was learning how to give a presentation in a meeting in front of a group, and it started showing on the job. And so I went to my boss one day and I said, we spend an awful lot of time, wasted time, looking for files that are at this remote location, that remote location. Here's a plan for organizing our files differently so there's almost no travel needed and the things that are truly archived stay out there. And he said, that's brilliant. And a day or two later, he promoted me and made me assistant to the board of directors. Wow. And I got a raise. And then my fellow employees chose me as president of the Employees Association as a joke. And I took it seriously and all of a sudden got them free parking and all kinds of extra benefits they'd never had before. And so it caught on. One thing after another kept adding up. The better I got at what I was doing, the more other people noticed it and the more opportunities opened up.
That's been part of your mantra, hasn't it? Your message that you put out, that the more you improve your mind, the more your life will improve in so many ways, often ways you don't plan, it just happens. So I interrupted you, but you were saying you got promoted and then you started working, selling motivational materials and sales materials. Yeah, the man that had
sold me Earl Nightingale's recordings, which I still have on my shelf up here, I'll show you. These recordings on both sides, doesn't look like a recording. Looks like a book, but it's actually a cassette. Remember cassettes?
Little things where you put a pen in to wind them backwards and forwards.
There you go. 48 of those. I bought them for $560 when my salary was $525. And wow. And we had no savings. So that was not a popular expenditure at first. But the man that sold them to me, he said, look, Jim, I know you can't afford these, but you can't afford not to have them. You need them a lot. You've got to reprogram your mind to be able to think bigger and better than you were trained so far. And I said, well, I understand. I agree. And I would love to listen to those recordings regularly, but I don't know what to do. He said, take this home for 30 days and listen to all these tapes. And at the end of the month, if you don't want them, bring them back to me. If you do, figure out how to pay for them. Well, I figured out how to pay for them. And then I fanatically listened to those every single day. I'm not exaggerating, for almost 5 years. And my life just transformed.
I have seen the transformation, and you're telling the story. It's so believable because I've seen the result. And while you're saying that, let me take a moment to take a message from our sponsor. Our sponsor is me. And when Jim said, take the tapes home for 30 days, well, that's the same story here. You can join the Colin Pearce Academy and you can learn about speed read people in a blink. You can take the business leadership blueprint. You can work out how to employ new salespeople. You can follow the principles of leadership, and you can follow the principles that are all laid out before you in day by day, week by week study. You can study them for a month and it won't cost you a thing. And just like Jim, I believe at the end, many people will say, I'll stay. There you are. That was a commercial brought to us by our sponsor, C. John Pearce,
excellent
Esquire.
Sponsor. Excellent sponsor and a great academy. I would encourage everyone to do that. Seriously. We only become as good as we're capable of tapping the resources that we started with, unless we multiply ourselves with new information and new connections. It's like Charlie Tremendous Jones, famous motivational speaker from the USA. Years ago, he said, You are today the same person you will be 5 years from now, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read. Well, enrolling in the academy is the modern day equivalent of reading a book or many books. You know, of course we can read books and should, but in addition to that, we have today podcasts and webinars that weren't available back then. So we can expand our learning and personalize it so much more by connecting with someone like you, Colin, where it's not just one-way data. We have the capacity to ask questions, get your personal coaching, you know, and truly make this a meaningful relationship, a mentorship where people are able to grow. I've done that in my own career. I've gone from being primarily a keynote speaker and motivator to being a virtual vice president or a strategic advisor, where a company or a small group will bring me in on an ongoing basis and just have me at their elbow throughout the year until they feel like they can make it on their own just as well without that. And I'm able to provide a booster rocket for people.
Jim, I don't, it's a bit unkind, I suppose, but I don't see many young people following the principles that you did in those early days of devouring everything you could find. It's almost as if there's so much to do, so much preoccupation. What do you think there is that people would not be avid readers like you were? You've come across them and you must have wondered like me.
Yeah, and I think it's the apathy of familiarity. When you live next door to Zig Ziglar, or Jesus is the head of your neighborhood watch program, or God lives a mile down the road and you see him driving to and from work every day. When whoever your leader, guru, inspiring other happens to be is nearby and familiar, you tend not to think it's that urgent. Well, I didn't have that. I loved my family and they loved me, and I had good friends, and I thought I'd have a nice life, but I didn't want a nice life. I wanted an excellent life. I wanted a fulfilling, a meaningful, rewarding life. I wanted to matter. I wanted to make a difference. And so I knew if I didn't scramble and do something extra beyond what the others did, that I wouldn't be able to do that. And so since I wasn't going to get that through academic education, I had to become my own, dean of my education. And by the way, today, still no college degree, but I sit on 3 university boards, not the board of directors, but advisory board, School of Management for California Lutheran University. I'm the entrepreneur in residence and on the Dean's Advisory Council, Pepperdine University, and also in the University of Akron, Ohio. I did a stint on Fisher School of Professional Selling there. I've written 20 books, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And some of those are used as college textbooks around the world.
I can relate to all of that. To my great surprise, my alma mater invited me to be on the Board of Governors, and I would never have thought that likely. I must say I grew up thinking I wasn't too smart. And it was only later that I realized that there are things you can learn, things you can master that may not be on the school curriculum that give you such a great edge. Jim, where did you go?
I want to drop something in here before you ask your next question. I think it's really important that we recognize intelligence is not processing power.
Yeah.
I mean, IQ, okay, that's processing power. That's what they're measuring. But they're only measuring a few types of processing power at that. Intelligence is the ability to make distinctions, to notice little details and understand the patterns and the principles that drive those details. And you can become more intelligent about anything by choice. You don't have to increase your basic equipment. You have to change the way you use it. So choose a subject. I can show you how to become more intelligent about it. And it all starts with notice more.
I'm just absorbing that. Notice more. When my kids lived in England, we went to visit them several times, and my son said the principle of touring is to look up. And he said, you'll see all the old buildings that were wonderfully built and designed in times past, and they're all above the verandas. You walk along the footpath and all you see is the shop windows. But if you look across the other side of the street and look up, you will see building designed by, building first established in, and it's really quite a wonderful piece of education. So,
You know, that's a good metaphor too, because in any situation, if you look up to the purpose behind it, look up to the reasons for it, or the history of it, or, you know, look for the greater meaning, you will gain more wisdom.
Indeed. All right, let's move on in the career. You started professionally selling these motivational materials. You work for Nightingale.
Door to door,
Was
calling on people, you know, just calling on businesses and going in and saying, excuse me, Mr. Pearce, I'm Jim Cathcart. I represent Nightingale Conant Corporation. We help people become more productive on the job. May I ask how many people you have working here? You know, and then I'd go into my little routine.
Oh, come on, go through your routine. We got 15 here, and 10 of them work here.
Yeah, I started to say how many of them work for you, and the answer is 10 of them, right? The other 5 are not particularly motivated. Well, you know, in every business, what we found is that there are always a number of people who are not motivated, and or they're just not contributing as much as they could on the job. And the reason for that is usually not their skills, it's their thinking. So that's what my company helps you with. Change their thinking so their behavior makes its way to the job.
That's an appealing message. I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of remained your message for the rest of your career in everything you do. You just change people's thinking. You help them change their thinking. They've got to do it themselves, of course. Yeah. So after Nightingale Conant, would it be that this happened to me? So I'm just reflecting, it might have happened to you. Your story might be different. We'll hear. But I used to deliver videotape lessons. I used to sell videotapes.
Yeah.
And then people would say, oh, could you show us how to use these? And then after a while they said, we actually like you better live than on tape. Oh, you're good on tape and everything, but could you come and do that live, or could you come to our conference? Is that where it evolved for you?
Yeah, a little bit, but I ended up in a success vehicle that I had not expected or anticipated. I joined the Junior Chamber of Commerce, the JCs, and they were big at the time. They had 356,000 US members and more members all around the world. And the Junior Chamber of Commerce was for young people what Rotary and Lions and Kiwanis and groups like that were for grown-ups. And the purpose of JCs was to teach young people business skills, how to plan a meeting, how to organize a project, how to motivate other people, how to set goals and make plans and make decisions and things like that. So every time we did something in the community to raise funds for the March of Dimes or the Heart Association, or to hold some special event to make money for the community, we would always write it out in advance, conduct it, and then analyze it at the end to learn the leadership lessons from it. So I joined a local JC's chapter in my home community in Little Rock, Arkansas for $20. 20 people were needed to form a chapter. I was number 3, and I recruited 13 of the first 20. I just went through the neighborhood saying, hey, we can do this. Would you like to join? And I didn't even know the people I was calling on. And so they joined. We held a number of meetings that were awkward and finally got better at it. And then they said, well, Jim, you recruited most of us. Why don't you be president? I said, no. That's way over my head. They said, okay, you'll be our liaison to the state headquarters. And you'll go learn what we need to be doing and bring it back and tell us. Okay. So I did that. I got pretty good at it. I took their managers, what they call officers and directors manual, and I memorized it. I read it 3 times cover to cover and memorized it so I could recite it almost without looking. And I became popular as a person that the chapters would bring in to tell them how to organize a meeting or plan a project or whatever. So I ended up doing a number of meetings in other chapters. And then they said, well, we're going to make you the district director for the 5 chapters in your area. So I did that. And then they said, you were the outstanding district director for the state out of 280 chapters. Well, thank you. They gave me the first plaque I had ever received in my life. And then the next year they said, we want you to be state chairman in charge of leadership training programs, kind of like the Nightingale Conant job. And so I took on that chairmanship. Now, this is all after work in the evening for no pay.
Oh, wow. And this is
In
great
2
because
years,
you didn't
2
want to be
years.
president. You didn't even want to be president of your own
No.
chapter. And here you are,
In
state
2
director.
years, I did 400 meetings for free after work.
That was some apprenticeship in leadership and platform skills, yes?
Every day I'd get off work, come home and eat dinner with my wife and my little tiny son. And then I would get in the car and I'd go to a JC's meeting somewhere and make a presentation. And many of those presentations were very poorly done, but I got better and better and better at it. And after 400 of those, you get really good. And so I got the opportunity to move to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was about 150 miles away, to the national headquarters of the JC's, Junior Chamber of Commerce, and be in charge of leadership training programs for 350,000 people. And that got me flying all over the country and collaborating with researchers and writing training manuals. And after 2 years of that, I launched my own business, and I'm still doing it 43 years later.
And you were just, in common terms, a bozo who'd never graduated from university, and yet
Exactly.
you demonstrated that there's a will to lead and a will to be different, and there are means, like those books you started with, the tapes you listened to, and that principle of Charlie Tremendous Jones. You'll
That's
be
right.
the person you are today unless you read those books and meet the right people, listen to the tapes. Jim,
Truly.
that must have been a fantastic experience. And
It was.
You saw a lot of
Yes.
America, met a lot of Americans.
Yeah, I did. And I joined the National Speakers Association, which was new in 1973. It was formed. I joined in 76. They had 200 members. Today it's like 4,000 members, and they're all over the world. And actually there's more members than that worldwide. But I ended up involved in that and then rose to the position of president of that. And then I was inducted into the Professional Speakers Hall of Fame, along with Zig Ziglar and a number of my other heroes, Earl Nightingale and people like that. So wow. I mean, just wow.
Yes, I think that's when we first met, when you were president, and your brand, the Jim Cathcart brand, has been implanted well and truly into the professional speakers and national speakers associations of the world. You've worked for some pretty high and mighty companies and toured to many places. Let's talk about the places you've been that you never would have dreamed of as a 200-pound.
Well, how about Oz? I mean, I've been 10 times to Australia, and I'm way overdue for my next trip. But I've climbed Ayers Rock. You know, I've been to Darwin. And, mate, you got to have a Darwin stubby. Right. Get off the plane. Hey, welcome to Darwin. And here I'd been flying 30 hours and had to go through Alice Springs to connect to get there. And I was wrinkled and tired and sleepy. And they said, hey, we got the ABC cameras here. We're going to do an interview. So I had to walk off the plane and go, hello.
Did they offer you
that? And I've been on the Gold Coast, and I've been to Adelaide and Melbourne. And, you know, the only place I haven't been that I really, really wanted to go was Perth.
Where's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bigger than Texas. Did you know that?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, not Perth is, but Western Australia is.
The USA.
Western Australia, and they keep on talking about seceding because they don't think the rest of us care. They're right about that, but we don't want them to secede either.
Exactly. You know, there was, I think it was, the joke is when Lyndon Johnson, who was from Texas, was president of the USA, he said, I think we need to split Alaska into 2 states because I want Texas to be the biggest state again. And they said, well, sir, that's a commendable idea, but if we did that, Alaska would be the first 2. It's that big.
Yeah.
He said, oh, well, never mind.
Yeah.
But Texas is huge.
Yes.
It's like West Australia.
And you've been welcomed here 10 times, you say. That's been fantastic. Where else have you been apart from Australia?
Well, I've been literally around the world 3 times on lecture tours. My most recent one was 2017, and I did a tour of China and then flew to Poland through Moscow and did a speaking tour in Poland. And then from there up over the polar ice cap and into Canada and then the USA. And I've been, in the last 5 years, not counting 2021, in the last 5 years, I've been to China 20 times, mainland China, 20 separate trips, 23 major cities, speaking each time to thousands and thousands of Chinese business people.
Good.
So I did 71 days in the year 2019 in country in China on 6 separate lecture tours doing motivational speaking to young people that are just emerging from a very different society China had the generation before.
Did you have an interpreter or are they?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, you did? So they still haven't got universal English as a second language?
No, wo hai bu wei suo zhong guan. You know, I don't yet speak Chinese. Every time I spoke, Kitty, my translator, was at my elbow. And that's awkward at first, but I would speak for up to 6 hours at a time to 2,000 or 3,000 people and all of it through a translator. And at first it was awkward, but after a while we got our rhythm down and got to where it was just as natural as water flowing.
Years ago, I spoke at an Italian-speaking church and had an interpreter. And I was talking about, I think I was speaking about when Jesus threw all the freeloaders and oafs out of the temple.
Yeah.
The disciples stood by and said, the zeal of the Lord hath eaten him up. So I said, the zeal of the Lord had eaten him up. And the guy goes, blah, blah, blah. And it swallowed him in one bite, blah, blah, blah. It had put him down the throat without even straining him through its moustache, blah, blah, blah. And after a few of these, I got really carried away. I noticed that he was saying the same thing. I said, hang on, you're not saying what I said. And everybody laughed. And those who could understand English knew what the problem was. He said, well, we just don't have as many synonyms in Italian as you have in your head. So I'm just saying the same thing over and over. It's fun being translated, though, isn't it? You've got to pace it, as you say, and you had this person.
And all your humor was falling flat and you couldn't understand why. You know, one time I was in Taiwan and I was speaking to about 1,000 people, and my interpreter's name was Thomas, and he was in a booth at the back of the room, and everyone had the headsets on. And I'd been speaking for 2 or 3 hours maybe. And I said, hey, Thomas, tell the audience, the speaker just said something very funny. Please laugh. And so he did. And I waited and they all laughed. And I said, now tell them what we just did. And he told them what we had just done to them, and they laughed even harder. And so we had a good time together. That was a fun day.
Yeah. Well, let's.
I even played rock and roll music for them. They had a guitar for me. I've gotten to where I ask for that now.
Do you?
When I'm going to do a keynote speech, I'll say, hey, could you have a guitar? And I have a special arrangement with a company called Guitar Center, and I can buy guitars at a special rate and have them shipped to my venue where I'm speaking. And if I'm using the guitar as part of the talk, of course, the talk is not about music. The music will just be a novelty. but I'll be in the middle of a speech and then I'll pick up the guitar and I'll start playing and singing a song to make a point or do something. And then the audience will give me a polite applause. And sometimes they'll say more, more, more. And I'll say, no, I have to finish my speech, and I'll do it. And at the end of the speech, I'll say, would you like another song? Yeah. So I get the guitar back out. I do a couple of songs and get them all excited and feeling good. And then I say, hang on for a second. You know, I was told by John Smith that Colin Pearce is sort of the heart and soul of this organization, that everybody here kind of follows Colin's example. Colin, would you come up on stage and join me for a second? And they all applaud and cheer, and Colin blushes and he comes on stage. And I say, Colin, this company thought so much of you that they wanted me to give this guitar to you. So let me sign this for you right here. And I give it to Colin. And then everybody cheers and he goes home. Isn't that cool?
That is totally, totally cool. If
now, you know what he's going to do when he gets it home. He's going to hang it on the wall.
Absolutely.
And everybody who comes there is going to see it.
If I were rich and famous like you, I would do that too. That is a great little thing to do.
And that only costs like $500 total for that, you know, the guitar and all the things that make that possible. So that's not bad.
Just to give a little plug from our other sponsor, which is
Cathcart Institute is what we call it. But my website is my name, cathcart.com. Or on LinkedIn or Facebook, you know, yep. Jim Cathcart. And I've got, as you mentioned, 20 books: The Acorn Principle, Relationship Selling, The Power Minute, which came out in the year 2020, a number of others, The Will to Win, which I co-authored with Brian Tracy and some others. Tony Alessandra and I, Tony's an expert in personality types. We've written books together, and gosh, you know, just so many. But Cathcart Institute is basically the extension of me and my philosophy in whatever services we can provide to help a company or an individual grow. So I have all those books, and those you can get through the usual book sources like Amazon and such. The main thing I do today is what I call virtual vice president or strategic advisor. If it's an individual, a high achiever who wants somebody in their corner for an extended time, I'm their guy. If it's a company that just wants my thinking in all their people and wants me to sit in on meetings and write occasional articles and conduct some training programs and be available for a decision-making or a problem-solving session when needed, you know, we do that sort of thing. And I just love doing that because it keeps me connected to people I know like yourself and care about, and allows me to help them grow. And then whenever they're done with what they got from me, they go on their way, happily disconnected. I'm not like those consultants that try to make an annuity out of everybody. I believe my job is to become progressively less necessary for you. So the better I teach, advise, and consult, the less you need me, and the better job I've done, and the more I could feel good about it.
Fantastic. I'm going to contact you again, and we'll talk about one of your books. So give us a little hint about which book you would like to talk about when we
Let's talk about The Acorn Principle and The Will to Win.
I had the feeling you were going to say that because that's your big brand. Hey, will you finish with a little chorus just to tease us for next time? The famous Jim Cathcart, cowboy, rock and roll singer, motorbike rider, and road runner, international speaker and celebrity, now plays. What are you going to play?
Let's do How Would the Person I'd Like to Be Do the Things I'm About to Do? It's much better when you can see from a higher point of view. How would the person I'd like to be do the things I'm about to do? If you want to build a better world, be a better you. There you go.
Oh, okay. Well, round of applause, and everybody else is giving claps as well. Jim, thanks for speaking with us this time, and we look forward to seeing you again when we talk about the ACORN principle. Thank you for being there and for being so determined to be a leader.
Ta.
Now, will you do me a favour and drop a comment in your browser for YouTube or iTunes to give the Be So Good podcast a bit of a leg up in the ratings? And I'll offer you a favour in return. I hope you'll take it up to try out the free 30-day trial of the Colin Pearce Academy. It actually might cost $1 in some situations, but that's how the access system works. Anyway, you'll have access to all the courses, speed read people in a blink, convert your inbound phone leads, the business leadership blueprint, and the flagship course, Sell More, Easier, Faster. Its address is simple, www.colinpearceacademy.com. Hit the enrol button in the navigation bar and then fill out your details, and when it asks you to pay, use the coupon code 30-day trial. Here's that link again,